In the beautiful evening twilight, Carol Watson looked up from the microscope in her laboratory and checked the time. 6:15 p.m. She'd stayed later than planned again today. She hurriedly removed her lab coat, grabbed her bag, said brief goodbyes to her colleagues, and left the research facility. "I have to make it to Amy's piano recital," Carol muttered as she got into her car. On her hand gripping the steering wheel, a faint mark remained where her engagement ring once shone. Even after 5 years since the divorce, the trace hadn't completely disappeared. 20 minutes later, she slipped into the elementary school auditorium. Her daughter Amy had just finished her performance, and the audience was applauding. Carol stood by the wall, watching proudly as her 12-year-old daughter took a deep bow. Amy's long brown hair reminded Carol of herself as a child. "Mom! You came!" After the recital, Amy ran to her mother. "Of course. I only caught the end, but your performance was wonderful," Carol hugged her daughter. On the drive home, Amy eagerly talked about events at school. Although Carol was tired, she nodded and listened attentively to her daughter's stories. This was her daily routine, working in the lab as a capable researcher at a pharmaceutical company during the day, then struggling as a single mother in the evening. When they arrived at their apartment, Carol prepared a simple dinner. While doing her homework, Amy talked a little about her upcoming weekend visit with her father. "Dad and Linda are taking me to Disneyland," Amy said with a somewhat unenthusiastic tone. Carol paused for a moment, knife in hand. "That sounds like fun," she tried to respond cheerfully. The divorce from Greg hadn't been amicable, but they maintained basic courtesy for Amy's sake. Her ex-husband picked Amy up once a month for the weekend and brought her back Sunday evening. This arrangement had been kept for 5 years. However, things subtly changed when Greg started dating a woman named Linda Morrison 2 years ago. Linda showed an unusual interest in Amy, sending expensive gifts when it wasn't her birthday and showing up at her school events. "Linda really praised my drawings again. But..." Amy poked at her pasta with her fork. "It feels strange." "What do you mean?" Carol asked carefully. "She's trying to be really close to me. But it doesn't seem genuine. She calls me my daughter even though she barely knows me." Carol was surprised by her daughter's keen observation. Amy had not only artistic talent but also an intuition for seeing through people's true nature. Saturday morning, Carol finally had time to recover from the week's fatigue. While having a picnic with Amy at a nearby park, she watched her daughter drawing in her sketchbook under a tree. "I like it when it's just us," Amy suddenly said. Carol smiled. "Me too." She gently stroked her daughter's head, silently vowing to herself to keep protecting this peaceful daily life. Work was busy, and sometimes she felt like she might break down, but Amy's smile made it all worthwhile. "Are you really okay?" Carol peered into Amy's face as she stood in the doorway, gripping the handle of her suitcase. "How many times do I have to tell you?" Amy giggled as she gently pushed her mother's shoulder. "I'll be fine. Don't worry. Martha will be here, I have school, and we'll video chat every day, right?" Carol sighed with relief. Martha was a housekeeper she had trusted for years and had left Amy in her care several times before. Still, this time was different. The business trip to China would last 2 weeks, their longest separation ever. "I'm sorry for being such a worrier," Carol embraced Amy. She felt reassured by the warm, solid presence of her daughter's small body in her arms. "But that's who you are, Mom," Amy smiled, desperately holding back tears that threatened to fall. "Do your best in China. And don't forget to bring me a dragon souvenir." Carol laughed. "Of course." Behind her, a taxi honked, and the driver leaned out the window. "You're going to the airport, right? We should leave soon if we're going to make it." Martha appeared at the doorway and placed her hand on Carol's shoulder. Don't worry, Carol. I'll take care of Amy. Go make your important project a success. Carol nodded and gave Amy one last kiss. I love you. I'll call every night. I love you too, Amy waved energetically. Have a safe trip. As the taxi drove away, Carol looked back, watching her apartment grow smaller. Amy and Martha stood at the entrance, waving. She imprinted the scene in her mind, Amy in her green dress, her brown hair swaying in the wind, and her bright smile. The conference in Shanghai went better than expected. Carol's team's presentation on their newly developed drug was met with great interest from Chinese investors, and she received praise from company executives. During her 2-week stay, she video-called Amy every night, listening to stories about school and cookies baked with Martha. Come home soon, Amy said in a small voice to the camera on the night before departure. I miss you. Just one more day, Carol answered gently. I'll be home tomorrow night. And I got you a dragon souvenir. Amy's face brightened. Really? Show me. Carol laughed and shook her head. That's a secret. Something to look forward to tomorrow. The next day, Carol boarded her return flight with a cheerful feeling. Looking at the sunset floating above the clouds through the window, she felt a sense of relief. Having completed her mission, she was now returning to her beloved daughter. Nothing could make her happier. After arriving in New York and clearing immigration, Carol hurried through the airport lobby, pulling her suitcase. On her way to the taxi stand, she stopped at a souvenir shop and purchased an additional small stuffed animal for Amy. 327 Murray Street, West Village, please, Carol told the driver after getting into the taxi. Looking at the passing scenery through the car window, she took Amy's souvenirs out of her bag, an intricately crafted red dragon figurine and the panda stuffed animal she had just bought. She could picture Amy's delighted face. Almost home, Carol whispered to herself. The taxi moved through Manhattan's crowded streets, approaching her apartment. Dusk was falling, and street lights were beginning to illuminate one by one. Is this okay? The driver stopped and turned around. Yes, thank you. Carol paid the fare and pulled her suitcase toward the familiar building. Reaching the apartment entrance, she checked her mailbox. Inside were several advertising flyers and one thick envelope. The center field printed, Family Court. What's this? Carol frowned as she picked up the envelope. Something about taxis. She boarded the elevator, and upon reaching her floor, took out her key and opened the door. Amy, I'm home. But there was no response. Amy? Martha? Carol called out again. Only silence greeted her. Maybe they're still out, she murmured, placing her luggage on the living room table. Looking at the clock, it was 7:30 p.m. Amy should normally be home from school by now. Perhaps Martha had taken her shopping for dinner. Carol took out her phone and called Martha. The phone rang continuously, but no one answered. Next, she called Amy's phone, but got the same result. That's strange, she thought, becoming slightly anxious, but told herself, they'll be back soon. Carol sat on the sofa and decided to open the envelope she had received. Breaking the thick envelope and taking out the documents, her heart began to beat rapidly. Case number 2023, FC 4582, read the official document. As she continued reading, the blood drained from her face. Order of termination of parental rights against Carol Watson. Your parental rights have been terminated. You are forbidden from contacting the child. The words danced before her eyes, becoming meaningless. Reasons cited included serious child neglect and emotional abuse. Reading further, she saw phrases like, as a result of an emergency hearing, and decided in the absence of the defendant. This is a mistake, Carol said in a trembling voice. This can't be happening. She tried to stand up but stumbled and collapsed on the floor. Her head was spinning and her vision narrowing. Feeling the signs of a panic attack, she desperately tried to regulate her breathing. A few minutes later, Carol was finally able to stand. She rushed to Amy's room, where an even greater shock awaited her. The room had been cleaned out, and Amy's belongings were gone. The drawings that had decorated the walls, the stuffed animals on the bed, the sketchbook on the desk, all had vanished without a trace. As if no one had ever lived there. "Amy!" Carol cried out. Taking ragged breaths, she called Martha again. This time someone answered. "Hello? Martha? Where are you? Where's Amy?" Carol demanded. After a moment of silence, a cold voice responded. "I don't work for you anymore. Goodbye, Carol." The call ended. Carol tried to call back, but a message played, "This number is no longer in service." With her mind going blank, Carol dialed Greg's number with trembling fingers. Her heart pounded violently as the call rang. "Greg, where's Amy? What's happening?" Carol asked, barely able to breathe. "It's the court's decision." Greg's voice was cold. "Amy is with us now." "What do you mean? Why would such a thing happen?" "Because you abandoned your child. Left her behind for 2 weeks. It was a business trip. You knew that. Martha was here, and I called every day." "It's too late, Carol." Greg's voice grew distant. "It's the court's decision." The call ended. Carol stood in shock. But that was impossible. Because strange incidents from before her trip flashed through Carol's mind like a montage. Amy saying, "A strange woman keeps staring at our house." Martha reporting, "Lately, odd mail has been coming in your name," and that suspicious figure captured in the background of photos Amy had taken. It had all been planned. Something happened during these 2 weeks. Someone had taken advantage of her absence to steal her beloved daughter. Carol collapsed on the floor, staring at the ceiling. Tears streamed down her cheeks. But along with the sadness, something else was beginning to grow inside her. Anger. And determination. "Amy," she whispered. "I will get you back." Carol took her phone from her pocket and dialed the number of her lawyer, Jane Foster. Jane's voice remained calm even over the phone. She was the lawyer Carol had hired during her divorce, and her sharp judgment and unwavering conviction had been a great support to Carol. "But Amy is..." Carol's voice trembled. "We will get your daughter back," Jane said with a determined tone. "First, bring those documents to my office." "Can you come now?" Carol looked at the clock. It was nearly 9 p.m., but she answered, "I'll come right away." 30 minutes later, Carol sat on the sofa in Jane's office, receiving a warm cup of coffee with shaking hands. Jane carefully read the court documents, frowning. "This is strange," Jane said. "There's evidence that an emergency hearing took place, but the lack of notification to you is a clear procedural violation. And the date of this hearing, it coincides exactly with when you were in China." "So they knew I couldn't attend," Carol said bitterly. "That's not all." Jane pointed to another page in the documents. "This statement. It's supposed to be from Amy's teacher, but the signature, something's off." Carol leaned forward to look. Indeed, the signature supposedly from Sarah Johnson bore no resemblance to her teacher's handwriting. "I'll contact Sarah," Carol said. "It's too late tonight. Call her first thing tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, I'll investigate the court records immediately. There must have been some fraud." It was past midnight when Carol returned to her apartment. Standing before Amy's empty room, she decided to sleep there tonight. Lying on her daughter's bed, inhaling the faint remnants of her scent, Carol rested her exhausted body. The next morning, as the first light streamed through the window, Carol awoke. She immediately grabbed her phone and called Sarah Johnson. "Hello," she answered in a sleepy voice. "It's Carol. I'm sorry for calling so early." Sarah's voice instantly became alert. "Oh, I'm glad. I was trying to contact you. I was worried about Amy." "What do you mean?" "She recently transferred schools. 2 weeks ago, Greg and Linda came with legal documents." "What did they say?" Sarah hesitated. "They said you had died in a car accident. Amy also said Mom died in an accident." Carol gasped. "I'm alive." "That's a lie." "I thought so." Sarah's voice was mixed with relief. I sensed something was off in her eyes. She didn't seem to fully believe it. "But what could I do?" "They had legal documents." "Do you know where they moved to?" "Unfortunately, they didn't tell me the details. They just said it was for the family's new beginning." After hanging up, Carol reported the situation to Jane. The lawyer took immediate action. "I'll file an emergency petition with the court. And I'll contact the police as well." That afternoon, Carol was reviewing photos of Amy from before the trip in her apartment. Amidst her mixture of sadness and anger, her attention was suddenly caught by the background of a photo taken with Amy's smartphone. A photo of Amy laughing with friends in front of school. And standing a little distance behind them, a woman. Carol enlarged the image. Linda. With trembling fingers, she scrolled through other photos. The picnic in the park, the shopping mall, in front of the movie theater, in various places, the same woman was watching them from a distance. They had been stalked. That night, there was a knock at Carol's apartment door. When she opened it, police officer Mike Johnson was standing there. "Carol Watson. I received a call from Jane Foster." Carol nodded and invited the officer inside. She showed him the photos she had discovered and the court documents. To be honest, Mike said, looking at the photos, this alone would be difficult to prove as a crime. It's weak evidence of stalking. But they lied that I was dead. Carol raised her voice. "We will investigate that point. If a false death certificate was used, that's a serious crime." After Mike left, Carol was exhausted but couldn't sleep. She recalled what Amy had said before the trip. "There's a strange woman who keeps staring at our house." At that time, Carol had dismissed it with, "It must be your imagination." Now she realized that might have been the beginning of everything. The next morning, Carol's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello. Carol. This is Jeanette Brown, the mother of Amy's friend Zoe." "Jeanette. What's wrong?" Amy sent Zoe a secret email. Jeanette's voice was excited. "Zoe showed it to me last night." Carol's heart raced. "What did it say?" "It said, they told me Mom died in an accident. But I can't believe it. Help me." And there were also clues about where she is now. "What kind of clues?" Carol asked, holding her breath. She wrote about a big red sign she could see from her window. A Riverside motel. Carol immediately contacted Jane and the police. The Riverside motel was in New Jersey and was listed among Greg's real estate company's properties. There was a high possibility they were staying there. "Hurry," Carol told Officer Mike. "Amy might be in danger." "Please calm down," Mike answered coolly. "I'll get a search warrant immediately. But you need to stay here. If they are indeed committing a crime, your appearance could make the situation worse." Carol wanted to protest, but had to admit Mike had a point. "All right. But please act quickly." "I promise," Mike assured her. "We'll bring your daughter back safely." That afternoon, Carol waited in her apartment. Looking out the window, she prayed for her daughter's safety. And for this nightmare to end soon. The phone rang. It was from Jane. "Carol." The lawyer's voice was excited. "They found them. The police searched Greg and Linda's house. Amy is safe." Carol nearly collapsed with relief. "Really? Is Amy okay?" "She's confused but physically unharmed. She's at the police station now. Come quickly." In the car heading to the police station, Carol didn't even notice the scenery passing by the window. Her mind was full of thoughts about Amy. Jane's words that she was confused worried her. What had her daughter been told and made to believe? When she arrived at the police station, Officer Mike was waiting for her at the entrance. He quietly guided Carol inside. Walking down the hallway, Mike explained the situation. "Based on the Riverside Motel information, we investigated properties owned by Greg Watson. We discovered a house he had recently purchased near Princeton, New Jersey. As a result of the search, we were able to rescue your daughter." "Where is Amy now?" Carol asked anxiously. "She's talking with a psychological counselor." "She's confused," Mike said, carefully choosing his words. "Your daughter was led to believe that you had died in a car accident." Carol's chest ached. "Let me see Amy." Entering a small consultation room, Amy was sitting next to a female counselor. When she looked up, tears welled in Carol's eyes. "Mom." Amy's voice was small, her expression disbelieving. Carol rushed over and tried to embrace her daughter. However, Amy tensed and pulled back slightly. "Is it really you, Mom?" Her eyes were filled with confusion and fear. "Dad and Linda said you died in an accident." Carol said gently, "I'm alive. I just came back from my business trip to China. Remember? I promised to bring you a dragon souvenir." Tears welled up in Amy's eyes. "I couldn't believe it, that's why I emailed Zoe." Carol embraced her daughter, and they both cried for a long time. In another room, Jane and Officer Mike were discussing the results of Greg and Linda's interrogation. When Carol rejoined them after her reunion with Amy, Jane turned to her. "Carol, sit down. What you're about to hear might be shocking." Carol took a deep breath and sat down. "What happened?" Mike placed a stack of documents on the table. "Linda Morrison created a false accident report by impersonating you and fabricated evidence that Carol Watson had died." "What?" "She used your personal information to create a fake death certificate. Then, immediately after you departed for China, she filed an emergency custody application with the family court." Jane continued, "She applied for emergency custody citing mother's absence and also submitted fake witness statements. The judge believed this and issued an emergency order." "But can such a thing be done so easily?" Carol asked in disbelief. Mike made a bitter face. "It's usually difficult, but suspect Morrison had the skills to forge your signature. She previously worked as a notary. Also, by targeting the timing of your business trip, she created a situation where you couldn't immediately refute the claims. And Martha? She appears to have been bribed. A substantial amount was deposited into her account. She's also under investigation as an accomplice." Carol held her head. "But why? Why do such a thing?" Jane answered quietly, "According to Linda's statement, she wanted a child but couldn't conceive due to infertility. She became obsessed with Amy and wanted to raise her as her own child." "And Greg?" "He says he cooperated out of love for her," Mike said coldly. "However, we are confident that Linda Morrison is the mastermind behind the plan." Carol was shown the investigation materials on the spot. There was evidence that Linda had been monitoring Carol's daily routine for months. Her behavior patterns, work schedule, and most importantly, even the detailed itinerary of her China trip were recorded. Even more shocking were the numerous photos of Amy found on Linda's phone. Photos taken near the school, at the park, and sometimes through the window of Carol's apartment. Clear evidence of obsession. "She will undergo a psychiatric evaluation," Mike said. "This behavior pattern indicates delusional attachment." That night, Carol stayed with Amy at a temporary safe facility. Her apartment was off-limits for a while due to the investigation. Amy was exhausted and quickly fell asleep. Carol gazed at her sleeping daughter's face, reflecting on the events of the past few weeks. "Why didn't I notice?" she blamed herself. When Amy said, "A strange woman is watching," she should have taken it more seriously. The next day, a formal court hearing was held. With Carol's existence confirmed, the termination of parental rights order was immediately revoked. She legally became Amy's sole custodian again. After the hearing, Jane approached Carol. "The prosecution intends to seek maximum penalties. Document forgery, kidnapping, false reporting. The charges against Linda and Greg are quite severe." "How long could their sentences be?" "Linda, as the mastermind, will likely receive at least 10 to 15 years. Greg, as an accomplice, should be prepared for 5 to 10 years. Carol gazed out the window. "All I want is to live peacefully with Amy." "You've regained that." Jane placed her hand on Carol's shoulder. "But Amy has suffered emotional trauma. Her recovery will take time." That was indeed true. Amy would sometimes wake up from nightmares in the middle of the night and occasionally asked anxiously, "Is Mom really Mom?" The psychological counselor explained that recovery from trauma takes time. A few days after returning home, Carol sat by Amy's bed, tucking her in. "Mom," Amy said in a small voice, "that day when Dad and Linda came to pick me up, Martha said, 'Something unfortunate happened to your mother.' I didn't believe it right away. Because you were video calling me every night." "And then?" Carol gently asked. "But the next day, Dad came with someone from the police and said Mom had an accident. I got scared." Her voice trembled. Carol embraced her daughter. "It's okay now. I'll never leave you again." That night, after Amy fell asleep, Carol sat on the living room sofa, staring at the photo in her hand. It was the last photo she had taken with Amy before the trip. She placed the photo on the mantelpiece and quietly vowed, "From now on, I'll be more vigilant. To protect you." On a morning after the rain, sunlight streamed through the window. Carol was making coffee in the kitchen, staring at the calendar. A year had passed since that incident. "Mom, I'm nervous about today's exhibition." Amy came down the stairs in her pajamas. Now 13 years old, she had grown a bit taller, and her expression showed more composure than before. "You'll be fine," Carol smiled. "Your paintings are wonderful. Everyone will be moved." Over the past year, their lives had been slowly but surely repaired. With the support of a therapist, Amy began expressing her experiences through her art. Her works gradually changed from dark tones to bright colors, and a local art teacher noticed her talent and expressiveness. Today was the day Amy's work would be displayed at a young artist's exhibition at a local art gallery. "Call me when you're ready," Carol said. "We plan to go to the gallery at 11. After Amy returned to her room, Carol gazed out the window, reflecting on the past year. The trials of Linda and Greg proceeded swiftly, and both were found guilty. Linda received a 12-year prison sentence for kidnapping, document forgery, and obstruction of justice. Greg was sentenced to 7 years as an accomplice. For her daughter's sake, Carol had minimal involvement in the trial. Amy didn't need to testify in court. A video-recorded testimony was used instead. During the trial process, Linda also underwent a psychiatric evaluation. She was diagnosed with a delusional personality disorder and reported to be under the influence of surrogate delusion stemming from infertility issues. However, the judge did not accept this as a mitigating factor and severely condemned her planning and cruelty. Martha was also judged as an accomplice and received a suspended sentence. She deeply regretted succumbing to financial temptation and cried throughout the trial. Initially driven by anger and vengeance, Carol found these emotions fading with time. Now her heart was occupied with Amy's recovery and their future. She continued her work at the pharmaceutical company but adjusted her working hours to spend more time with her daughter. She also began volunteering for a nonprofit organization called Protecting Children's Rights, supporting families who had similar experiences. By transforming her own suffering into a force to help others, she herself was also healing. Carol's contemplation was interrupted by Amy's voice. "Mom, I'm ready." When they arrived at the gallery, many people had already gathered. Amy's work was a series titled Journey, consisting of 5 paintings. The first painting depicted a maze in dark colors, gradually increasing in light, with the final painting showing birds flying into a bright sky. "Wonderful," a local art critic told Amy. "The depth of expression is beyond your age." Amy smiled proudly, though somewhat embarrassed. Carol watched from a distance as her daughter chatted with fellow artists. "She's a strong child." Turning around, Carol saw Dr. Martin, the therapist, standing there. Carol nodded. "She's much stronger than I am." "You're plenty strong yourself," Dr. Martin smiled. "You both have shown remarkable resilience." After the exhibition, Carol and Amy decided to have a late lunch at a nearby cafe. Sitting at the table, looking at the menu, Amy suddenly said, "I think about Dad and Linda sometimes." Carol looked up in surprise. Until recently, Amy had avoided talking about those two. "In what way?" she asked carefully. "Dad used to be kind, right?" "He loved me," Amy said, looking out the window. "I wonder why he changed." Carol took a deep breath. Sometimes people make wrong choices for the people they love. Even though that doesn't excuse it. "I understand," Amy nodded slightly. "I don't want to see Dad anymore, but I don't hate him either. I'm just sad." Carol squeezed her daughter's hand. "That's a very mature feeling." That night, after Amy had gone to sleep, Carol sat on the living room sofa, reading a small article in the newspaper. Linda's name was mentioned in an article about a rehabilitation program for female inmates. According to the article, she was isolated in prison and still trying to justify her actions. When Greg visited, she said, "It was for our child," but Greg reportedly left saying, "She's not our child." "I've lost everything." Carol closed the newspaper and looked up at the starry sky outside the window. Her and Amy's wounds hadn't completely healed yet, but the two of them had begun walking forward together. That was the most important thing.